illustrious crew of the Nautilus has been ordered to destroy the alien tower at the expense of their own lives. Let us see what happens, because 25 minutes of empty video would be ridiculous. Enjoy. There was a sound, like the roar of a train or the bellows of a hurricane, and the whole ship shuddered and shook, and then it rang like a bell. That piercing high note resounded in my ears. I saw a bright blue light in my left eye, and then a bright red light in my right eye. Then my head exploded. A dazzling white light. So this is death. Is this the tunnel they talk about, toward which we rush heedless and helpless and headlong, to be met by... I felt as if I were sheeted in rubber, and it was shrinking and tightening over me like a straitjacket, violently cosseting me and robbing me of my breath. I felt panic. I felt like a man drowning. Tighter and tighter. I tried to cry out for help, but no sound left my lips. I couldn't breathe. But then the lights in my eyes died, and the bell-like ringing sound diminished into silence, and suddenly the rubber sheet I felt constricting me split apart like a cocoon bursting, and I emerged from it butterfly-free, gasping for breath and wondering how it was possible that I was still alive. I glanced quickly over at Willie, and he looked numb, practically catatonic, wonderment in his green eyes.
It's gone, Captain.
Gone? What's gone?
The mech tower. Gone just as if it never had been.
But we're still here.
Affirmative. There's more,
Willie said. What?
None of the arms were launched. No missiles deployed, no torpedoes fired, lasers inactive. We didn't throw so much as a pebble at that thing, but it's gone.
Sweat leaked down my face. Nothing was fired? I muttered. That explains why we're still here, still alive.
Yes?
But it doesn't explain what happened to the mech tower.
No, Captain, no it does not.
Some of the other crew members began stumbling onto the bridge, dazed. Evidently, they had gone through the same thing that Willie and I had experienced. The lights, the pressure, the sense of being flung slingshot-like into some far distant place. Tiernan was among them. Her eyes were haunted. Like Willie and I, she was aware she had dodged death. We all must have felt the way that old-time cons felt while strapped to the electric chair, when just as they are about to get the juice, the phone rings. It's the governor on the line, with the reprieve. Mumblings, bustlings, comparing of stories.
The mech structure is gone,
Willie reiterated emphatically. The people on the bridge burst into applause. Not Tiernan, though. I glanced at her and she remained standing there immobile with that haunted look in her eyes. What the hell, Willie? I demanded. Did he just pick up and leave? Just like that? Hailed a cab? Jumped in and shot off for who knows where? The Andromeda Galaxy? What do you suppose the fare would be for a trip like that? Some lucky cabbie? What's it all mean? My voice was high and piping. All the crew was looking at me. Their eyes. So many staring eyes. I felt like a fool. I was the one who was supposed to be masterful and composed, in charge. Here I was squealing like a ninny, and I especially felt embarrassed before Willie, who maintained a brittle composure in the face of an inexplicable and frankly frightening situation.
I don't know, Captain,
Willie said, and suddenly a big smile spread across his face. Willie did not smile often. I reckon he was glad of one thing, to still be alive.
It's not there,
he kept saying.
It's not there.
And that smile of gratitude and wonderment remained creasing his face. Everybody stopped talking and looked at Willie.
It is not there,
he said again, softly this time. His smile was infectious, and now everybody was smiling, except me and Tiernan. Now Willie, his brain jacked into unending megastreams of wireless data crashing on the shores of his mind like wild waves on tall cliffs, lost his smile. His sea-green eyes corkscrewed with intense concentration.
Captain,
he said.
Whatever happened must have scrambled communications. I am getting nothing from the outside world, nothing from any channel. The noosphere is down. It's completely down.
My fear returned. But how can that be? Willie did not reply. I swallowed my new fear and tried to affect an air of jauntiness, of triumph. It had been too long since any of us had had that feeling. We needed something to celebrate. Any champagne around here? I bantered, maybe a bit too loudly, but I was thirsty and I was alive. And regardless of this new problem of shutdown communications, I wanted to celebrate. The others looked at me with curiosity. No? No champagne? Well, what? Anything? Anything at all? How about some coffee at least? Chef? He said no on champagne, but we had coffee. It was something, anyway. The chef, his name was Leiden, broke out the coffee and said he had enough for everyone, as always. The coffee, like all the food and drinks, was constantly being assembled atom by atom, molecule by molecule by angstbots. It had been a long time since anyone had had to grow food the old way. I wanted to ask Chef why the hell he couldn't grow some champagne, but I guess he had his orders, and the crew should stay sober at all times. This job was too important for tipsy celebrations. In the 15 minutes of relieved revelry before the coffee showed up, I noticed that Willie wasn't smiling anymore. He calm-licked me quietly and brought up the multi-sensory 3D displays from the region that we were in, and then offered remote views. It was murkily dark outside, except for a swollen full moon and the faint flickering glow of the Milky Way high above, that sprawling bracelet of stars in the night sky glimmering down into the depths of the ocean, and the light only fading out just before it reached the ocean bed.
Wooden ships.
Willie said tonelessly. Excuse me? Then I saw them too.
Those are wooden ships with sails up above,
Willie said. I goggled at those vessels. But there are no more wooden ships, Willie, I pointed out. Who the hell would...
Hobbyists?
He speculated without conviction. Who the hell would be sailing hobby horse vessels out here in the South China Sea in the shadow of the Mech Tower, Willie? That makes no sense.
The former tower,
he reminded me. He calm-linked me more data from his brain to mine. Inside my head I saw wooden ships. Yes, that is what they were. Some flags flapping in the wind. What were those? I couldn't see the color, but 3 vertical stripes. Sailing at night, under the moon, and Milky Way. But with what aims? I was so rapt I didn't even realize it at first when Leiden handed me a mug of coffee. When it finally registered what I was holding, I looked gratefully down at it and then up at him, but he only smiled, winked, and wandered on. He was handing out more steaming mugs, and he gave one to Willie, and I saw Willie raise the mug to his lips, and then he went back to watching the ships above and searching for the mechs below. The mechs who apparently were missing in action. Grabbed an interstellar carriage or something. I sipped my coffee. God damn, but it tasted fine. Just to taste the hot, acrid caffeine in my tongue that should have been dead, and still, and untasting, and silent evermore. As soon as I put down the mug, I heard a loud crash. My head whirled to my left. Willie had toppled to the floor, supine, staring up, pop-eyed, at the ceiling of the bridge, rigid, splay-limbed, and trembling all over with epileptic fervor. Foam-like saliva oozed outward and downward from the corners of his mouth, which was ajar. His lips were livid and spasming.
Help me!
He croaked in a faltering voice.
Everything's going dark.
I froze. I stared at Willie. Tiernan was down on one knee beside him. She glanced up at me, brushing aside a raven wing of hair, and her dark eyes skewered me. What is going on? I beseeched her and the others in a high-pitched voice, further demoting myself, in their eyes and mine, as a legitimate captain. But then my terror-frozen body suddenly unlocked and I ran over to where Willie writhed on the floor, a look of incomprehension in his wide-open eyes. His rigidified body kept bucking and thrashing spasmodically on the floor. It was terrifying. Tiernan ignored me. She was searching for her pulse on Willie, who had stopped speaking and now he suddenly stopped moving, having seized up. His eyes were beginning to roll back in their sockets, showing more and more whites, and his flesh was white too, as white as paper. Tiernan lightly slapped his cheek a couple of times, but he did not respond. Now his face was growing livid, indicating a lack of blood. Still cradling his wrist in one hand in search of a pulse, Tiernan cocked an ear to his chest, seeking a heartbeat, but now it seemed to me that his chest was no longer rising and falling. I felt weak in the knees, and was fighting down panic. I spread my arms and involuntarily asked, "What do we do now?" And immediately hated myself for having uttered the second dumb question in a row. Some captain. If Willie had been a car, I would have known what to do. But he was a person, albeit augmented with a good deal of machinery inside and out, and as I now learned, that machinery was bootstrapping into action. His chest suddenly heaved, and he again bucked and spasmed on the floor. He let out a kind of gurgling sound that saliva foamed around his lips, which puckered and unpuckered. Suddenly, he drew a sharp intake of breath, jutted for a moment, and then his chest resumed rising and falling, feebly at first, and then with greater vigor. As I watched this happen, stunned, I caught snatches of Tiernan's authoritative voice explaining to the others, her back turned to me, what was happening. Willie's body had been flooded with angst bots. They were defibbing him, jump-starting his momentarily stopped heart and pushing air into and out of his lungs as if they were a couple of bellows. He was damned lucky. 100 years ago, a man would have had to be defibbed by an external machine, with no guarantee of success. But here, he was breathing again, breathing normally, and his body suddenly became less rigid and even seemed to relax a little. Ominously, however, his eyes remained rolled up in the sockets and showed only whites. Willie did not utter a word. The only sounds that escaped his lips now were those of steady breathing.
Get him to the infirmary,
Tiernan snapped, assuming my role, the role of captain that she had craved, and the others got him on a gurney and rolled him off of the bridge. Everyone crowded out the door after him, and in a moment, I was left alone, feeling lonelier than I had ever felt in my life. Lonely, not just because I lacked any connection with the crew, but lonely with the terrifying prospect of losing Willie. I was the captain, right? Should I be in the infirmary, or should I be watching the ship? I needed somebody in Willie's position, running tactical and driving this beast. Could I run it myself? Who knew how to run this thing? Tiernan? But she was in the infirmary with Willie and the others. Reluctantly, I established a comm link with her, mind to mind. I had never contacted her remotely before, and I felt a little ashamed of myself for intruding on her mind space. I hate to say it, but this intrusion made me think of rape. The bad part was that you could sometimes catch stray thoughts this way. It was low-level mind reading. I did not want to read her mind. I knew all I needed to know from the expressions on her face when she was near me. Those expressions, suggesting that she had just smelled a skunk. Tiernan, how is Willie doing? I need somebody up here on tactical. A very irritated voice spat back.
Willie is on life support, with very little brain activity. I don't know how to use the medical equipment. I'm not a damn doctor. And we have no medical crew on board.
I buried my face in my hands and massaged my temples, which suddenly ached. The veins there pounding. Of course we had no medical crew. We were on a 22-hour suicide mission. Or had been. Who needed a medical crew for a bunch of people who had been sentenced to die? Or sentenced to be statues, as Willie had put it. I chuckled bitterly at the thought of myself as a concrete figure looming high over some plaza, chest thrust out, jaw set, eyes scanning some distant horizon. Captain William Rickover Hansen, the plaque might read, noble commander of the Nautilus, who with his crew perished that the rest of the world might live. I wondered then, fleetingly, was all history founded on lies? Were the narratives, myths, and stories that we tell each other, ourselves, and our kids mostly bullshit? Because there couldn't be any bigger bullshit than lionizing a loser like me. In any case, it came to me that whatever this mission was now, it no longer was a suicide mission. We were alive, though Willie was in desperate shape. The mech tower was gone, even though our weapons remained unsheathed, but something else had arrived. Ships bobbing on the surface of the ocean top like toy boats in a giant bathtub. Or, all links to the outside world were down, even though it appeared that all our equipment was functioning normally. I overheard Tiernan comm-linking the others.
Anybody here know how to run tactical? Our captain needs some help.
Although she was speaking, I swear to God I could somehow hear her put contemptuous quote marks around my title. There followed a hubbub of confused and indistinct conversation. Just some muttering and babbling. Tiernan was cracking out the commands that I should have been giving.
Ensign Steve, get on tactical and communications right now. I want torpedoes hot and ready to fire in 2 minutes. Gordy, jack into the medical SAM and start finding out what's wrong with Willie. The rest of you back to your normal posts. Go now.
Moments later, Ensign Steve arrived, per Captain Tiernan's orders. He glanced at me, and I think he might have smirked, as if to say, worthless coward. Maybe that is what my parents saw in me. Worthless coward. That was the look Steve gave me. Worthless coward. Pull up tactical, Ensign. I want to see what's out there. I watched the ensign trying to manipulate the displays and equipment. but only a handful of people in the world could properly handle this ship. All the more wonder Willie was here in the first place. Tactical screens winked on again, screens inside our minds. I blanched. 2 mechs, or mech machines, remained thousands of feet below us. Complex black scuttling entities like mechanical sand crabs with multiple appendages of different shapes and sizes, churning up the wet earth at the bottom of the ocean, debris that formed obscuring clouds around them, like robes of smoke around cantering mystical demigods. Up above, those inexplicable wood boats still bobbed on the surface of the ocean. So the mech tower was gone, but not the mech machines. Not all of them, at any rate. Some of the other crew members had filed back onto the bridge, and, of course, they were waiting for me to make a decision. I was glad Tiernan was still in the infirmary with Willie. "Ensign, patch through to the president. Let's see what he has to say." It was an order, anyway. Pass the buck. Didn't the buck stop with the prez and not me, anyhow? I heard Ensign Steve put out a general call on all open channels and wondered why. "What are you doing, Ensign?" Then I remembered. Before Willie passed out, he had told me that all links to the noosphere had vanished.
"I am not getting a response on any channel, Captain,"
Ensign Steve said. His voice rose, and there was a bright, strangled tenor note of panic in it.
"It is like nobody is out there. Nobody."
I looked at him, and he at me. Unlike Tiernan and a few others, Ensign Steve did not intimidate me. That was because I thought that he, like me, was a bit of a joke. He was competent, but just barely so. Mediocre. I had little confidence in his ability to fill Willie's role, but what choice did any of us have? If Steve was competent at anything, it was seducing women. He was handsome as hell, and the word himbo came to mind, which was stupid. Why was I thinking about such irrelevant nanities at a time like this? I ransacked my poor thoughts for a solution to this riddle. "Maybe," I proffered, "the disappearance of the tower has disrupted all comm channels." That sounded stupid. The real question was, how had the tower disappeared? But given that it had in fact vanished, maybe the idea that this impossible vanishment had played havoc with communications was not so far-fetched after all. I looked at the wood ships above us again, bobbing on the dark seesawing ocean. Outside it was indeed very dark, except for a strong, bright full moon, as big and hard and bright as a hood of bone. The moon and the Milky Way, that sprawl of stars. The words Moonskull inexplicably flashed through my mind, something suggesting death. I pictured a rising full moon shining down on Graveyard, the tombstones silhouetted against it, just like those sails of the impossible wood boats. And then I got sick with fear again. Why? Because by the clock, the time was only 3 in the afternoon. Steve had reconnoitered. It had taken him much longer than it had taken Willie, but the result was the same.
"No communications, Captain. No comm links. No comm anywhere. Anywhere on Earth."
Silence. Then I broke it. "What time is it, Steve?" My voice registered barely above a whisper. He looked at me curiously. Then understanding dawned in his eyes. "The moonlight, the Milky Way."
"Not possible,"
he stated flatly, but the look in his eyes told me that he knew it had to be possible, because it was real. Real things are possible things. We had gone from afternoon to late night in about 10 minutes. That was what was real, whether we liked it or not. That was scary, and so was this. I don't think I can recall a moment of my life that I did not have at least some access to the noosphere. All of us are jacked into it from cradle to grave, our birthright and death right. But not anymore. Now, there was no connection to it at all. For want of anything better to say, I asked Steve, "Any status change on the mechs?"
"No, Captain. Rock solid below us at 7,800 feet, scuttling about the ocean floor like goddamn shrimp. And those wood ships above are moving away from us at 4 knots.
Much as I hated to do so, I opened a private comm link to Tiernan. "Lieutenant, the mechs are around but not moving much. Their tower is gone. We have at least 4 and maybe more wooden ships above us, and all links to the noosphere are down, which is, of course, impossible. And Willie..."
Willie is in a coma.
My stomach cramped. A heavy silence dropped between us like a funeral curtain. Yes, I could read her mind at a low level. It took on colors: purple, indigo, deep blue, punctuated with flashes of angry red and tempestuous yellow. She was sneeringly thinking,
What the hell do you want from me, Captain? You've got that title, remember? Just because of your famous name. It's the title I deserve, but you have.
and then it hit me. They made me captain because of my name and for no other reason. That Rickover name was a link to the past, a past so remote and inchoate in a world constantly changing. The historical link would be important in keeping the American project going. I'm not a person, nor even a symbol, nor a statue. Yet, I'm just a name. I understand, Lieutenant, I responded cravenly, acknowledging her acid contempt for me. And so I'm asking you, what the hell do we do now? I'm not competent to decide. I hope you are. A long silence, the turbulent colors of her mind. Finally, she said curtly,
I'm coming up there, Captain. Out.
Just like that, gone. I needed food. In the galley, Chef built me a modest meal from mere atoms, and I wolfed most of it down swiftly and greedily. I'm not even sure what it was, but it tasted good and warmed my stomach out of its knot. When I returned to the bridge, with what was left of my food, Lieutenant Tiernan was there with Ensign Steve.
What do you mean the mechs are on the ocean floor at 7,000 feet?
Tiernan demanded of Steve, asking the question that I should have asked.
Did the bloody ocean floor suddenly move after the earthquake? Recalculate that distance, Ensign, and laser map the whole area.
Yes, Captain.
Steve said to Tiernan, Captain? And now I felt anger. With Tiernan barking commands, Steve calmed down and got to work. Another implicit rebuke of me. I sat in my captain's chair, cheap usurper that I was, feeling utterly useless as I finished my meal. Tiernan offered me a furtive glance of contempt, which was her right, but I felt another flash of anger at her. I was beginning to hate her. Then she went back to studying with Steve, the displays flashing in their minds like holograms on the sky of the skull. They didn't see fit to include me in their investigation. Suddenly feeling apathetic and very tired, I finished off with a sucking sound, a sound of something that might have been pizza, cheese, and dough, or maybe some stringy tender meat. These meals made from atoms consisted of foodstuffs for which people were still inventing names. I remotely comm-linked to the TAC displays, so I didn't have to engage Tiernan. A minutely detailed laser map of the whole region appeared in my mind, including schools of fish, seaweed, moats of mud, and the mechs or their machines. Whatever those things were, they had to know that we were scanning them.
Where the hell are we?
Tiernan's sharp voice startled me out of my obscure reveries. The displays in my head meant nothing to me, but they did to her.
This isn't the South China Sea?
She said.
What the hell?
The few others who had straggled back onto the bridge, those who had not remained with the stricken Willie, looked about in confusion. All attention was focused on Tiernan now. I was a bystander. I resented my marginalization, even though I knew that I deserved it. I finished eating, and the smacking of my lips drew a few contemptuous glances that demanded, how the hell can you eat at a time like this? The display appeared to all of us at once. The computer reported 95% certainty that our actual location was somewhere in the Balearic Sea outside of Toulon, France, but red lights were appearing all over the display, showing missing formations, shipwrecks, tidal generators, marker buoys, marine life, ocean salinity. The list of missing details seemed endless. Everyone was silent. No one could process what was happening.
Toulon?
Tiernan inquired sharply. She started to say something more, but evidently could not think of anything more to say and so remained silent. Here was the news. In a few minutes, we had somehow moved from the South China Sea to the North Atlantic, and from late afternoon to midnight. Maybe this explained the absence of the mech tower. It was right where we had left it. It was we who were in a different location. Night instead of day. I thought of those wood boats bobbing above. Those were 19th century vessels. That was a fact. Not a happy fact, but a fact nonetheless. The biologist, what was her name again? A funny name. I tagged her with my comm link and the name came up. Zoya Liu. Yes, that's it, Zoya Liu. It's hard to remember everyone's name when everyone was so recently introduced to one another. She was studying the displays with keen attention. I tagged everyone then. I wanted to know where they were and what they thought. Jennifer, Tom, Tad, Andre. Gordy was in the infirmary with the stricken Willie. I read Willie's vitals, heart, breathing, brain activity. He showed up red on the comm link. Red for red alert. Situation grave. I decided to turn on vitals for everybody. It was the captain's prerogative to do that, but I felt like a low-down sneak, or even a spy. I was pushing 120 on my heart rate. I needed to calm down. The comlink suggested that I take a mild sedative, but those tended to make me sick. I noticed that Gordy was the only person with a normal heart rate, just like a machine. Gordy, lover of art and guns, but also a misanthrope with rock-like empathy. Zoya was studying some fish.
Those are bluefin tuna.
She said, "So?"
Captain, bluefin tuna have been extinct for more than 100 years.
Oh, those silly little things, going extinct when they are so tasty. What a shame. But what will our crew discover next? Only time will tell.